Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits, not to be mistaken for Imelda Staunton. I could have been the star of Gypsy in the West End at the moment, because I do have a gimmick. I'm a man. But somehow that wasn't enough. I've heard that before. Anyway, casting nonsense aside in order to make room for more nonsense, what are we going to be talking about in today's episode of Musical Talk? Well, you know as well as I do that sequels very often don't work in musical theatre. Most shows don't have sequels at all. When they do have sequels, they're either modest successes, such as Divorce Me Darling, the sequel to The Boyfriend, or they're not really successes at all, like Love Never Dies. I'm sorry to say it, but it isn't really a successful show, which of course was the sequel to Phantom of the Opera. Very few shows go on to have more than one sequel, although there is always Annie, which had plenty of second sequels, if you sort of understand what I mean by that. However, we're not actually going to be discussing sequels of musical theatre, but we are today going to be enjoying, I hope, a sequel to an episode of Musical Talk. Episode 433, not that long ago broadcast, and was part one of David Kingsmill's Stage Odyssey. Oh, that's such a clever title, we thought we'd use it again. And there was every need to, because I have plenty of conversations recorded with David, who is an inveterate world traveller. I was going to say he's a globetrotter, and though he's very tall, he just simply can't play basketball, so that didn't seem quite right. But he travels the English-speaking world in particular, and either puts on shows or goes to see other people's shows, and then he very kindly comes over and talks to me about those shows he's seen. There was a whole raft of things that he'd enjoyed on Broadway and the Canadian stage a couple of years ago. Well, I caught up with him again before he went back to Canada to see yet more shows on Broadway and on the Canadian stage, to talk about the shows he'd seen the last time he'd gone to Canada to see shows in Canada and on the Broadway stage. I hope that makes some kind of sense. I suppose what I'm saying is he's sort of been to Canada 3 times. We've discussed the first time. Now we're going to hear about the second time, and we will undoubtedly hear about the third time in the future, but he's currently doing it at the moment, and unless I have a time machine, which very sadly I don't, police boxes not being widely available to me, we'll have to wait for that one. However, whilst we're waiting, let's listen to this, part 2 of David Kingsmill's Stage Odyssey, more on Broadway. Musical Talk. Well, David, we have had a highly enjoyable conversation already about the many shows that you saw on Broadway.
Indeed.
But such is the scheduling of Musical Talk that I can't turn my back on you for a minute, can I? Because when you come back, every time we see each other again, you've said, but I've incidentally seen X number of more shows on Broadway, let alone all the ones you've seen in London. So tell us a few of the ones you're going to see. Now, you're going to tell us about 4, I think. And
yes.
In your own words, they are going to be revealed in order of awesomeness.
Yes, which
is not a scale or category that I normally understand. But come on, show me what it means.
No, and in no way is it actually a put down to the first show I'm going to give you. Basically, I'm going to build them up in order of the last one that I'm going to talk about was my absolute outstanding favourite. So for those who aren't aware, I'm probably now going to be in England for quite a long time, which wasn't my plan, and I went back to Canada to pack up my flat there, and in the process did a 3-day trip down to New York, because why on earth would I not?
Having crossed the Atlantic, it seems silly not to have
exactly
done so.
And we knew in advance 3 of the shows that we were going to go and see, and we had a wild card as well. And interestingly, this was obviously before they were announced, we actually managed to see 4 out of the 5 Tony-nominated Best Actors.
Just by chance?
Just by chance, as well as various other bits. I mean, I say just by chance, they were fabulous shows, so it's not really a chance. We almost saw the 5th, we decided not to see Rocky, or it was on our wild card list, and it didn't win that particular day. But we did see some fantastic musicals, and the first one is a slight oddity, in the sense of it's not a book and lyrics musical in the way you might expect. It was called After Midnight. Oh, yes. And After Midnight is a revue that has been based on an earlier one called the Cotton Club Parade. And basically what it does is it brings you back to the Cotton Club.
Which is, let me see, the Cotton Club is the great 1930s sort of Hollywood club where all the celebrities and film stars were seen, and Duke Ellington ran the ran the band and orchestra for a while.
Absolutely correct. So, and that basically informs your music. So
I'm liking this already.
Indeed. Music and lyric. The list of music and lyrics is Duke Ellington, Jemmy McHugh, Dorothy Fields, Harold Arlen, and Ted Koehler.
Which says not a duffer amongst them.
No, exactly. That says a lot for what you got. Yeah. And then, there's fabulous stuff. You've got stuff like Devil in the Deep Blue Sea. I've got the World on a String.
Standards.
All the really, really fabulous standards on the sunny side of the street. Great music. And they did it full on. It was jazz band on the stage with the fancy wooden music stands, and
everyone
all the suits,
jackets,
everyone in their suits, and they had these amazing modular scenery. So there was a bridge that would come on and go off. I think it went off. That would be used for they'd sit on it and sing languorously. Or there was one astonishing moment. Bearing in mind the top was probably, I would say, no bigger than about 2 feet square, and someone tap danced on top of it. And it was insane. It was the most.
Well, angels dance on the heads of needles, don't they?
There was something like that. Yes. No, I think it was arguably one of the most holistically astonishing displays of performance I've seen.
Oh, really?
It was. I just sat there with my mouth open the whole night. It was absolutely extraordinary, and just such a pleasure to see that kind of music again.
And can I ask, forgive me, because you called it a review, which is interesting, and because it's a series of songs, there's no overriding plot or anything like that. But what was the intention? Just to reenact the Coconut Club nights of the, was the idea that you were there as you would have been in the 30s, or was it presented that this is, what level of disconnection? Let's force Brecht into this. What level of disconnection was there? Were you told this is what you were going to get, or was it as it was?
Yeah, kind of. It's the pieces are framed by Langston Hughes' poetry.
Oh, right,
and
okay.
So
which means it isn't a reenactment of the 1930s.
It's not a reenactment of the 1930s, but the poetry sets the scene and then drops you back into it in a way. So there is a disconnect. There is a suspension of, not really a suspension of disbelief per se, but you're certainly not watching.
It's packaged in a way, yes.
a standard review. Equally, you're not watching a book story.
Yeah.
There are stories woven into it. There are characters who come back on occasionally and are represented at points.
Oh, right, okay.
But they are not follow-throughs. And most of the time when somebody comes out, they come out as somebody different. And actually, that's another of the things, is the amount of character acting that was going on. You'd have someone coming out as a complete goof character, acting the fool and playing almost a Marx Brothers style character, and then he'd come out 3 or 4 songs later as a tough guy.
Oh, really?
And it was the variety in their presentation.
So what were these characters who were coming out, although there were a small number of actors playing lots of different characters, what were the characters doing? Because you said there's poetry and there's music. So what opportunity for acting was there?
They acted the song.
Oh, right.
There was a very, very temporary story that lasted the duration of one song. And sometimes there wasn't. Sometimes it was somebody standing. We were very, very lucky to see Vanessa Williams.
Oh, yes.
She actually came into it for just over a month, and we were there during her time performing. And she did a song where she just stood on the side of the stage, adopted her slightly high-class air, and gave us the song. And there were other songs, particularly amongst the comedy numbers, where a little story would be set up, and you'd have almost a farcical arrangement of people sitting on a bench, or 4 guys sitting on a big block who were all singing this song, but very clearly had character in them.
So almost like a series of sketches illustrated with music in some cases.
Yeah, it's a sketch. I suppose sketch review is actually probably not a bad way of describing it. Anybody who's going on there who has any kind of respect or love for the standard jazz classics.
What I call the Great American Songbook.
Yeah, just go and see it. Just go and see it. In fact, even as I'm saying that, I'm reading that it's closed. If it comes on again, go and see it. It only just closed. It closed about 2 weeks ago. But it was absolutely fabulous. So that I cannot speak highly enough. Now, no Tony Awards. It was Tony nominated, I believe, if I remember correctly. I think it certainly was Drama Desk, if I'm wrong about the Tonys. But, brilliant show. Yeah. So that was actually the first thing we saw, and that was our wild card, and we just went down to TKTS, picked a few shows, randomly chose one and got it, and I'm so delighted we went to see that.
May I just ask one final question on that then? Because the swing of that era and the jazz of that era is genuine jazz and great jazz, and I'm using the term genuine jazz because what I mean is
let me connect this to the Hot Mikado. The Hot Mikado is a recreation of a swing version of the Mikado from the late 1930s, 1940s.
Yes.
With an all-black cast. The original orchestrations were lost, and so when it's done these days, it's been reorchestrated to sound like the 1940s.
Okay.
But to my ear, they are ersatz, partly because I know that they're false. They don't, to me, sound quite like proper 1930s. They're not authentic. There's something. They're fun, they're jolly, but they aren't quite authentic. Were you able to identify whether the arrangements and orchestrations, particularly you had the big band sound there in the style of the Duke?
To me, I was sitting in the Cotton Club.
Yeah.
I think there's no way to... I would say there's maybe a couple of points where I detected a slightly modern singing style. A big loud high note got very slightly belted and twanged more than it would have done. But that's just being so insanely picky. And it was only, I think there was one note that made me go, oh, hang on, I just feel slightly dissociated now. But 99.8% of the time I was sitting in the Cotton Club.
Also, in fairness, people like Duke Ellington, etc., their arrangements survive, partly because they've all been recorded.
Well, that's it. Yeah. And also, I mean, they were innovators. They were people who pushed the boundaries, and I actually think it's perfectly in sync with their work to do that with your performance of it.
Yes, so do I.
So
that's show number one.
That's show number one.
On the awesome scale, that's awesome. But there's more.
Absolutely awesome.
There's awesomer.
Yes. So slightly more awesome would be seeing and I think we talked about this in our first chat, of the new arrangement of Les Mis, which I saw in Toronto a couple of times. Right. I seem to recall discussing that. I hope I did.
I think, yes.
I saw it again. It transferred to Broadway.
Oh, right.
And
this is Les Mis again, basically.
This is Les Mis again, yes. Basically, I apologies if I've already said this, but to recap in brief, what Cameron's done with it is he's grittied it up.
Yes.
He's shrunk it in terms of... Well, actually, I wonder if he has shrunk it. He's certainly changed it. It doesn't have a revolve anymore. It's got projected backgrounds that have slight motion to them, which are actually in setting with the paintings of the time.
He slightly modernised it.
But at the same time has almost made it more real. And I mean, this was, I would say, the singularly best performance of Les Mis I've ever seen.
Really?
Largely, I think, because of the astonishing combination of Ramin Karimloo's Valjean and Will Svensson as Javert.
So it is the actors who really brought this to life.
I mean, everybody was good in that, and I found even the characters who usually annoy me in that show were not too annoying. But really, those two just blew me away. Javert's suicide in that was heartbreaking. What Svensson did with it was just beyond compare. And I mean, I've seen some astonishing Javerts in my time.
Yes.
I think I may have said in a previous musical talk that Ramin and Hadley was my dream combination.
Yeah.
And I mean, they still remain fabulous. But and my apologies to Hadley. Fabulous performer. I absolutely love you, but we'll just pit you in this particular case. I would never have told you before I saw this that you could put me in front of a better duo. And I just sat in front of... It was the tiniest pit, but it was there.
How very interesting.
And that was astonishing. I won't say too much about this, because if I remember correctly, we discussed it at a little bit of length previously.
Do you think it will ever come to London?
That's a difficult question.
Because the London one is now very much set in aspic.
It is.
And like a lot of these shows, they do start to creak after a while,
Yeah.
I think, I've heard alternatively, I've heard someone say towards the end Blood Brothers actually picked up again, but it was creaking dreadfully when I saw it.
I saw it once.
Chicago sounded like a pirate ship.
I never got the point of Blood Brothers. I saw it once, and my grandmother, who actually took me to see it, who loved the show, said it had become a lot more poppy since she first saw it, and it was much better at the beginning.
Because it's lost its edge.
Because it's lost its edge. I'm sure that's true. Now, I can't remember how old I was when I saw that. I want to say I was about probably 17. It did not impress me in the slightest. I've never really had any wish to see it again, and I was not upset when it left. And I think a far better musical is now in its place.
Yes.
But anyway, that's that one. Will Les Mis come over to London? I don't know. That's a really difficult question to answer, because it's such a staple.
Yes.
And is it creaking? Perhaps it is a little bit. Is it creaking as much as something like Blood Brothers was? No, I don't believe it is. I think it holds up. Well, no, but I don't. I think it holds up really, really well. And I just wonder what the reaction would be if we upshifted the longest-running musical? Because bear in mind, it's been closed on Broadway for about 4 years, I think.
Yes, so it's a revival for them.
So this is a revival for them. This has come back. I don't know if bringing it over here without it closing first is a very good move.
It might do, because Cats is coming back, isn't it? So,
yes.
I mean, it may be that eventually Les Mis will retire from the London stage, and we'll never see that version again. Because,
but the new one will come.
Yeah.
If that happens, I will entirely understand it. If they try and swap it out, I would I'm not. I mean, I spoke to Cameron. I actually met him at one of the Toronto productions I went to, and he said, "Yeah, basically, it's been 25 years. I wanted to do something new."
Yes,
all power to him. He's revived a show
yeah.
and completely revised it, and it's worked.
You just had to do it in America because you can't do it in London. Yes.
Well, and that's it, and it's not been on. Yeah. So yeah, if it comes over now, I think it will be a mistake. Yeah. If it comes over in the future, go for it.
Yeah.
And if you get the chance, if you go to Broadway, go and see this. And I'd be fascinated to know anybody else's reaction to it, because it's so different but so good.
I suspect what people would love to see, which is this trend that's building up, is the idea of what I would call a telecast, a sort of live broadcast of a show, which you see a lot in opera.
Yes.
But you do see it
and the National
shows.
Theatre.
Yes, indeed. You see in places. That will be a fantastic way for a British audience to be able to taste this version of Les Miserables without it touching too badly upon the receipts and box office of the, let's say, face it, tourist trappy Les Mis, which is going to be there like a mousetrap until we all die.
And I'd be fascinated. And I also want to know if people share the two slight bugbears with the new production that I share.
Which are?
Massive spoiler alert. If you don't want to know, turn off now. I don't like Gavroche's death.
Oh, right, okay.
They've made this very, very savvy 8-year-old die in a very, very unsavvy way. He suddenly, all of a sudden, for dramatic effect, paints a target on his back, and I really don't agree with it. To the point where I almost asked Cameron why he did it when I met him, and managed to hold my tongue.
It's a real misstep, as far as
I think so, because he's this. It's this gritty, realistic. It's not. Not that Les Mis ever was, but it's even less tits and teeth than Les Mis ever has been. It's really gritty. It's and yet there's this moment of
sentiment.
No, it's not even sentiment. Basically, it's when he's climbing back over the barricade. You can't see over the other side, of course, because there's no revolve. He climbs up from the other side and suddenly stands up full on top of the barricade.
Oh, right. Okay.
Which Gavroche would never do.
No.
If he was shot by chance falling over it and just tumbled over, I'd have had complete respect for it. But because you have to see the kid die, he stands up and goes, "Hey, look at me! Oh dear, I'm dead."
Yes.
And I just did. The other one was they forced in Enjolras lying on the red flag.
Oh, really?
Which, of course, without the revolve, you don't get the same reveal. And the way they've done it... Actually, I quite like what they're doing. The fact that the red flag is there is horrible.
Oh.
And I'm sure it was put in because... it's a staple, iconic image. And having the red flag was fine. Having Enjolras lying on it, the way he's presented, I just couldn't agree with. And they're minor thing, and the fact that I'm picking on those says how good this production is.
But that's one of the problems, isn't it? When you've got a show which is so well established in a particular way and works, that if you do a new version, sometimes you've got to be brave enough to lose some of the iconography, as you say, of the previous show. Yeah. And those two feel like they've been shoehorned in.
Yes. Well, I don't know if Gavroche I don't think that was necessarily keeping iconography. I think that was just trying to put too much drama onto a particular moment, which, is maybe it's the right decision. Maybe other people disagree with me.
You can over-egg a pudding, though, can't you?
Yeah. Catherine agreed with me on this one, so, at least two people in the world disagree. The red flag feels shoehorned in. It really does. I don't know the truth behind it, and I'm purely speculating. And I don't even know who is. There's no way of saying who's responsible for that. I don't think it's a good idea. And there we go. Anyway,
you don't have to be a traitor sneering not to like this red flag.
No, quite. So moving on from there. So that was Tony Award number 1, of course, or nomination, which was Ramin. Tony Award winner, Neil Patrick Harris, and Hedwig and the Angry Inch.
Which is a revival. It's a revival of a musical based on a film, isn't it?
Yes, and this timed the trip to New York. This is why it happened when it did, because we wanted to make sure...
You saw it?
Yeah, we didn't know whether he would stay in it for terribly long. I believe he has confirmed he's not staying in it past his end in August. And if I didn't go in April, I wouldn't have seen it till after Edinburgh, and I'd have missed him. He was great. A lot of people are going, it's Neil Patrick Harris in a musical. Everyone's going to see Neil Patrick Harris. He's not Neil Patrick Harris at all.
Because he's an actor.
Yes. And there's
I
that
think
very...
people forget, because he's synonymous with so many things now, both politically, small p, and also in terms of acting.
Yeah.
That people forget actually he's a jolly good actor.
Yeah, and he, there was that fairly famous story. I don't know if you've read about it, where he got heckled. Somebody actually in the circle yelled out, "We love you, Neil," in a quiet, serious moment of the performance, and without breaking character, he just looked up and, language alert, said, "I'm doing something here, mother effer," and got on with the show. And apparently it was like he never shifted. He didn't miss a beat. It was like Hedwig having a go at this person, not Neil Patrick Harris having a go at this person. It's a fabulous musical. For those who don't know it, it's basically the story of Hedwig and her failure. She's this rock singer who gets betrayed by her partner, and you actually see, like in the middle of the show, she opens the back door of the venue that she's in, and you can hear the stadium crowd outside supporting the ex-partner.
Oh, really?
So there's a very powerful, bitter story to it.
Yeah, there's noises off as well.
Sorry?
Noises off.
Yeah.
I don't mean the comedy noises
No,
off.
no, yes.
Genuine noises off the stage, which have dramatic effect.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And, there's all these interactions. Hedwig's got her band on stage, and she's sort of got all of these people surrounding her who she interacts with, most particularly Itzhak, who's sort of the secondary character of the piece, and I believe was also Tony nominated, if I remember correctly, and entirely understandable. It was absolutely fabulous.
But what was it that made the show so impressive for you? Because, forgive me, on the awesome scale of 1 to 4, you put this at the heavy 3.
Yes. It just blew me away. It was bold, which I think has got to be part of it. It was extremely bold. This hasn't been put on for years because, as far as I can tell, to put it frankly, no one had the balls to do it. It's a risky show, because having a show that is so powerfully about transvestitism...
Is that commercial, is the question?
Is that commercial?
Yeah.
Is that too risky for this modern-day audience? The answer to that being absolutely not.
No.
It's
Taken
perfect
by
for the modern...
storm.
In actual fact, I think it's hit just at the right time. So it blew me away. It was also like the tiny little details in it. Massive spoiler alert, do not listen to the next 15 seconds if you're going to see it, because I don't want to spoil this for people who are. Yeah. They have a gag about the Hurt Locker, the musical, which repeats repeatedly, and about every fifth seat had a playbill underneath it for Hurt Locker, the musical. It was just the tiny detail, and the depth they went into with this show was incredible. Yes, somebody bothered, and all power to them for doing that. I think that was fabulous.
This is the difference between genuinely any show, in my view, can be raised in levels of quality when people care and bother, as opposed to this will do. The world is full of this will do, and people who just go the extra footstep just make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
We salute you, people who go the extra footstep.
And it makes all the difference. It really does. It raises a great production to an amazing one. And that's really what this was. And, you just sit there and bathe in rock music and an actually incredibly sad story. And
so it's a true rock musical?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was very, very powerful. There's some fabulous songs in it.
But it's a rock musical where it's the plot first, then, isn't it? Because when we think of rock musicals, how shall I put it? For example, We Were Rocky was a very well-known British rock musical, but the selling point is the fact it's the music of Queen and Freddie Mercury. It's not... No one says the plot is fantastic. No one genuinely believes it means a great deal. It is about the music. And so many rock music... I appreciate it's a jukebox musical, of course. But a lot of rock musicals sort of fall into that category that you are there because it's rock and it may be a series of songs that you like. Whereas this is a rock score on a piece of genuine drama, I'm guessing.
And it really is. I mean, basically, to give a rough gist, the idea of it is it's the character Hedwig was Hansel, who was described as a slip of a girly boy in East Germany, and was trying to get out. And the plan to do that is for him to marry a US soldier. But, of course, a marriage must be a man and a woman. So Hedwig has a sex change in order to try and facilitate this. And basically the operation goes wrong, and the surgery fails and leaves her with a completely dysfunctional 1-inch lump in her groin. Hence, Ed Hedwig and the Angry Inch. Yeah. And so it's this very, the very, very serious story behind this. And I won't tell any more of the plot. I could, but there's no point, because I think, this is something that needs to be seen. Yeah. I think it's one of those pieces that tells such a powerful story because there's a powerful message behind it.
It requires engagement rather than just narration.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing about why is it such a great musical? Because it's just an amazing performance. Everybody is on stage almost the entire show.
Oh, right, okay.
There's very little time anybody spends off it. Hedwig in particular.
There's no green room for them.
No. And it's astonishing, and it's also very, very funny. There's is it the drummer? Oh, good heavens, I can't remember. I think it's the drummer whose name is Skzp. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think it is SKZZZP.
Oh,
and he keeps complaining that no one pronounces it correctly. And it's great. You know, there's little bits of humour in it that are just so fun. But Hedwig's story is really sad. Hedwig's performance is A, brilliant, and B, actually quite funny. So, you know, there it is. And a genuinely worthy Tony right there. It's not Neil Patrick Harris being given a Tony. It's Neil Patrick Harris being rewarded for a seriously good job. Yeah. So yes, that's number 3. So what's number 4, people ask? What I suspect is going to be my show of the year, probably my show of the decade, and quite possibly my show of the century.
You liked it, then?
Yeah, just a little. Which is A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder.
Oh, which has made enough noise for me to have been picking up rumblings about it.
Yeah, pick up more than rumblings. Get a copy of the soundtrack. Do something. Go to New York and see it, preferably. This is hands down the best piece of theatre I have seen in a very long time. It's written by Friedman and Lupvak. They're an American writing team, and I would swear blind that they are channeling the spirits of Gilbert and Sullivan.
Good, I'm on.
I thought that might get you. But no, really, it feels like a modern-day Gilbert and Sullivan music hall show. They present it as a musical. They have a stage on the stage. Everything's done. I was challenged. Catherine challenged me after this and said, 2 of the people in this cast are English. Who are they? And I had to think because it was performed so well. It really sounds English. It's just hilarious. It's the funniest thing I've seen in a long time. I've had the soundtrack on repeat for about 4 months, having forced myself not to listen to any of it until after I'd seen the show because I didn't want to spoil it for myself, and I knew I would. Fantastic. If you listen to nothing else, look up the Patter song Poison in My Pocket. It's just genius. It basically tells the story of a chap called Monty Navarro, who is he suddenly discovers he is the 8th in line to the earldom of Highhurst Castle.
This is Kind Hearts and Coronets, for those of us who know our Ealing comedy, isn't it?
Quite possible. I don't know the Ealing comedies well, I have to say. I only really know the Lady Killers. But yes, possibly. But anyway, he decides to bump off everybody between him and the earldom.
And are they all played by
one person?
Yes.
They are.
Yes, as they were played by Alec Guinness in the original.
Right.
And it was Dennis Price bumping them all off one by one. It's a brilliant British film, a black and white film, I think from the 1940s. One of the great Ealing comedies,
right? And
it's been which, you know, forgive me, it's absolutely this American Broadway piece is absolutely infused with a British sentiment, then, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. It really is, and it carries it so well. There was no point where I felt this was an American musical.
Oh, really?
Which was extraordinary.
On Broadway, yes.
That's on Broadway. That's so unusual because Broadway has, you know, I think that they do have their grit and they do have their serious moments, but it's usually an American show, and you can tell that. And I really couldn't with this. I would have, had I not already known, I would have probably guessed that they were British writers who'd succeeded over there somehow.
Oh, how very interesting.
And I mean, again, 2 Tony nominees here, and I must admit, I was rather hoping there was going to be a colossal catfight between them because they're just so funny. Which is Bryce Pinkham, who plays the Monty Dysquith Navarro. His full name is Dysquith, being the Earl family. Jefferson Mays, who plays the entire Dysquith family, including the female cast for the most part, with one exception. And my goodness, those 2 are phenomenal. They really, really are. I tell you one thing, we got, I think, 2nd row or front row seats or something like. We weren't quite that close. Maybe 5 or 6 rows back. And the eye acting that goes on, those 2 have incredible eyes. The work they do with them. If you go and see this, pay the money and sit up close. Yes. Often I don't think it's worth it. With this, it absolutely is. There's subtlety in the performances in this show that I've never seen before. And comedy just everywhere. There is no point at which there's some genuinely touching songs and touching moments, but there is no point at which you're ever going to take this show seriously.
No. Very much like the film is a send-up from the very beginning.
Right. Well, I mean, that's very, very much what they've done, and it's astonishing. It's a really good ensemble piece as well. Like, the ensemble songs in this are brilliantly choreographed, brilliantly sung, and it's all just really well written. And hearing something like this in 2014 as well, it's...
Is it likely to come to Britain, do you think?
I sincerely hope it does.
So much of Broadway doesn't.
No, so much of Broadway doesn't. I think honestly, if this fails in Britain, the British public should just give up, because I think I can't see how it could. It's
got to get here first.
It's got to get here. Yeah. It's stereotypical, yes, but it's stereotypical in the way we would stereotype ourselves.
Oh yes.
It's not Dick Van Dyke.
No.
English. It's English.
Well, it's clear that British people can engage with it because you have engaged with it.
Yeah, absolutely,
and positively, if I may say.
Very much so. Much as I absolutely love NPH, and much as I've wanted Ramin to win a Tony ever since I first heard him, I wanted one of these two. Particularly, probably Jefferson May, as much as I love Bryce Pinkham's performance, just playing 8 people so well, or 6 people, how many it is it actually plays. It's just so good, and I really wanted him to get it. But yeah, if this doesn't come over, it's a crime. It really, really is, because A, it's so good, and B, it's tailor-made for the British public. Because yes, it's Gilbert and Sullivan, which means the classicists of the musical theatre world will go and see it by default. But the humour and the presentation is modern enough that it's not clunky. Yes. It's not going to feel like it was written 120 years ago. And that's fine. Because that's why I say they're channeling the spirits and writing now. They're not mimicking. They're not making it exactly the same.
It's a 21st century musical and has all the professional and trappings and edge of a 21st century musical.
Yes.
With a 20th century plot and a 19th century musical influence.
I believe so.
There we are, 300 years of quality there.
Yeah, absolutely. Distilled. Good things come to those who wait, right? Distilled into a fantastic show. And I just cannot say enough. At the very least, get the soundtrack. And if you think you're ever going to get over to Broadway, don't get the soundtrack yet. Go and see it first. Because it will, having now heard everything, I'm glad I didn't, because it would spoil it.
Here's a question. Why hasn't a clever impresario bought or built a British London-based, or anywhere, but certainly a London-based theatre, called it the Broadway Theatre, and then just use it specifically to bring over either originals or duplicates of the surefire Broadway hits?
Because I don't have the money.
That's a very good answer.
No, I would love to do that. That is a very good question, and I think the other thing that I think is there are shows. What I'd be interested to see is a show that got garroted by the press and never succeeded. There's wonderful shows. A couple of years ago, listeners will probably remember me banging on about Wonderland in much the same way, less so, but much the same way I'm now banging on about Gentleman's Guide. And that died after 60 before. It did 30 previews, 30 performances, and died a death because it was killed. And actually, I'd love to see a theatre where a show like that was actually finally came into its own, just as it was dying, got another chance. But equally, there are all these fabulous shows that are good enough, like Gentleman's Guide. And what I'd love is a transfer theatre where something can come over, run for 2 months, go, this is what we do, and then have somebody else pick it up and stick it into one of the big London theatres.
If it's got a run for it, absolutely, because there is so much happens on Broadway, which, because I don't go to America, I haven't been to America, I have a certain amount of trouble flying.
Right.
Well, as all humans do, but what I mean is I don't like going in an aeroplane, and forgive me, just simply, I know there have been 2 rip-roaring, roof-raising, massive revivals of How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying.
Which was amazing.
In the 90s, and then again in the last 10 years with Radcliffe.
Oh, yes, well, I saw that one, obviously.
But of course, it was the Broderick version in the 90s,
yeah.
yes. But both of them sold out, were fantastic, simply perfect, and it's not even a whiff of coming over to London.
Yeah, which is again a travesty, because as we discussed when I was doing Guys and Dolls, the writing that you get in those shows is phenomenal, and it absolutely deserved to come over. And I'm actually rather surprised that Daniel Radcliffe's presence in it didn't pull it over by itself.
I could not agree more.
And
he sold out in Ecuador.
That's another one where you go and see that. If you went to see Daniel Radcliffe. If you're a 15-year-old girl, you probably saw Daniel Radcliffe. If you're anybody else, you saw... I forget the character's name now.
J. Pierpont Finch.
That's the one. You saw him. And much the same way as with MPH, you don't see MPH. And I thought that was... The fact that it was that good, and it had him, and it didn't transfer, rather astonished me. But there you go. That
By the
seems
way,
to be
just
the
for
way
our
of it.
audience, I want to point out that MPH here is not miles per hour. It's Neil Patrick Harris.
Yes.
It's NPH.
NPH.
So my ear is turning it into miles per hour. And I think it took me a second for that penny to drop.
But yeah, and I think it's a great shame. I think there should be more. I think. Dare I say it? And you confirm this for me, because this is based purely on speculation and not having studied. there is more original writing in America at the moment.
Oh, I think so, yeah.
I feel like the West End is cluttered.
I think it's clogged.
Well, maybe even clogged with, not that revivals are a bad thing, but with revivals or with jukebox musicals or with stuff that's based on, this, that, or the other.
It is reverted to commercial conservatism.
Right.
Which it does periodically. The West End always does. It does have periods where it gets excited. Generally, the electros which wake the West End up, I think, come from subsidised theatre, like the National. I think the stuff comes out of the National, also from the Fringe, like
what's
the
it
Minier.
called? Warhorse.
Yeah, absolutely.
Warhorse came on, and all of a sudden, there's something to talk about.
Yeah. And, forgive me, you suddenly start seeing sort of powerhouse producing theatres outside of the West End or on the edges of the West End. So the Menier pumps into the West End.
It does.
The Old Vic pumps into the West End.
It does.
And the National pumps into the West End. And when things are going well economically, they did a lot of good for the theatre in the West End in the last 10 or so years.
Yeah.
The economic downturn, of course, which is still with us, at least in the way it feels. I know people are supposed to be getting richer, but I don't think people are. Theatre is now so expensive. It's falling, it's reverted to type. It's gone back to being very, very, very conservative with a small c, and therefore uninteresting. And actually, you can understand it because we have had a gamut of new shows this year. We had, and towards the end of last year, we've had I Can't Sing, we've had Stephen Ward, we've had From Here to Eternity, and none of them have lasted, whether they be good or bad.
No, this is absolutely true, and I think this is part of the problem. Is there's now an increasing lack of willingness to take a risk.
Yes. I wouldn't if I was an investor at the moment.
Well, this is the thing.
In a few years' time, I might, but not now.
I have broken the cardinal rule of theatre. Edinburgh is entirely coming from my pocket because no one will give me any money.
No.
Despite my best efforts.
Mark, Edinburgh's often like that. But
well, it is. But even if you try and even if you have a pedigree, which mine is questionable at best, but when you have even people who have that struggle, and it's really difficult. And I think the other problem is that you've got these people like, oh goodness, my apologies to you, my dear. I remember her first name is Laura, I forget her surname, who wrote The In-Between, which I did an episode on with a couple of the cast a couple of years ago now, has this wonderful demo cast recording, but it's a big ambitious show, and so she's got the fight of her life to get that put on. And you listen to that musical, and it's fabulous.
Yes,
but you've got
merit does not necessarily mean backing, though, does it?
No, it doesn't. Whereas this is one of the reasons why I think doing a small show, I couldn't afford to take a big show to it. I have two large cast shows in my head, and I'm terrified to write them because when are they ever going to get put on?
Yes, you do have that problem. I mean, not just you, everyone has that problem.
It's the writer's difficulty at the moment with the West End being what it is.
If you want to see a good show in London, a good new show in London, I think you're talking the fringe places like the Landor and the Fimbra. That's where the new stuff's coming.
Well, Xana, which I saw recently, and I mean, I had to do a sadly abbreviated episode on given my circumstances at the time, but that was wonderful.
Yeah.
That should transfer.
Well, that's a show that's been lurking around the edges of consciousness for years because I've never seen a bad version of it because it's a good show. It's a good show.
I'd never seen it before.
Oh, right. It was his first time?
It was the first time for me.
But
I was delighted. I loved it.
It's a lovely show.
And I think it probably faces similar challenges to Hedwig, which is that it questions the accepted norms so hard that it's one of those things that people when's the right time to put it on?
Well, I wouldn't put it on if I was a backer. I wouldn't put it on in the Palladium, but I'd certainly get it into the Arts.
Yes, it would absolutely do the Arts. I think that would be a fabulous venue for it. I think even it could handle one of the theatres along Shaftesbury. I think something like the Palladium possibly too big, but I think if you put it into something like the
Wyndhams?
The Wyndhams actually might be a nice one. The Donmar it could work out.
Yes, it could.
But I was thinking also places like not the Garrick, the Gielgud.
Yes.
The theatres like that are large, but they're not
stupid,
quote unquote king size.
Yeah.
Like, it would die in the Apollo Victoria.
Yes, of course it would.
But put it into one of those smaller ones, or the Aldwych, or somewhere like that.
Well, we're lucky to have intimate theatres in London.
Yeah, and I think it would work. But it's one of those things. You've got to have backers who are willing to do it. You have to have producers who want to put the show on. And I think for a show like that, unfortunately, it does have to be the right time. Which not every show that's true for.
No.
And I think something like Gentleman's Guide is timeless to a certain extent, but not always the case.
Well, David, this is a conversation I think we should have another time.
Sounds like it.
But thank you very much for your Gentleman's Guide to the Awesomeness of Broadway.
My pleasure.
And I look forward to speaking to you again when we review London West End in terms of actual shows, not just our satisfaction or disappointment with it.
Indeed.
Musical talk. Well, there we are, the wonderful David Kingsmill. I'm very jealous of David. He gets to see all the best shows in all the best places. And it is a big surprise that so many of these great Broadway shows don't come to London. Not least for Gentleman's Guide, as discussed there, which, as you heard, David gave such positive reviews to, and is based on a piece of British film, Kind Hearts and Coronets, and yet there's no sniff of it in the West End. I'd like to say it's a show to die for, but I think that might be a play on words too far, even for me. Well, there'll be more from David Kingsmill's stage Odyssey in the next few months. The next one will be about some of the shows he'd seen in the West End, so he's on this side of the Atlantic for the next episode. So be sure to hang around for that, because it won't be next week, but it shall pop up unexpectedly, I'm sure, in a few weeks or few months' time, and grace and tickle your lug holes. However, there will be another episode of Musical Talk next week, and speaking as a doctor, I recommend that it would be good for your health to listen to it. I'm not actually a doctor, of course, but I'm not going to disagree with what I said, because it does seem to make a great deal of sense. However, for the time being, it's probably appropriate for me to tuck myself up in some nook and or cranny and shut up. So I'm going to. And the best way to trigger that is for me to say goodbye, and here's me doing that. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk presented by Thos Ribbits and David Kingsmill and edited by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2015. And don't forget to follow us on these social networks. You know where they are, you know what they're called, and you know what to do. And why not follow me on Twitter at Musical Talk Thos.
But it's a rock musical where it's the plot first, then, isn't it? Because so many, when we think of rock musicals, how shall I put it? Oh, crikey, what's that dreadful thing that's just closing at the Dominion? We Will Rock You, so I'll say that again.
Oh, I love it.